The United States has a $12 trillion hole in its pension system. That's more than the entire GDP of Japan, more than the combined wealth of Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos multiplied by 50. $12 trillion that was promised to 50 million Americans, and it's not there. And here's what nobody's telling you. They're not planning to fix it. They're planning to let it collapse. Not through reform, not through bailouts, through controlled demolition of retirement security for an entire generation. Strategic, calculated, inevitable. You've been told to work for 40 years, contribute to your pension, and retire with dignity. But the math was a lie from the beginning. The promises were made when they knew they couldn't be kept. And right now, the collapse is already underway. This has happened 3 times before. 3 different places. 3 complete pension system failures that destroyed millions of retirements. And every single time, the pattern was identical. First, they underfund the pensions. Then they hide the numbers. Then they make bigger promises to cover up the problem. Then the investment returns don't materialize. Then the demographics shift. And finally, the whole thing implodes. And here's what should terrify you. The United States is following this exact pattern. Stage by stage, number by number. Almost like we're reading from the same playbook that bankrupted millions before us. This is the story of how pension systems collapse, why the people who designed them knew it would happen, and why 50 million Americans are about to learn that their retirement was never real. If this concerns you, and it should hit that like button now, because what I'm about to show you is something the financial industry doesn't want you to understand. Let's start with the first warning sign. Britain in the 1,980 seconds. In 1980, the British Steel Corporation had one of the largest pension funds in Europe. Over 500,000 workers and retirees depended on it. The fund held billions in assets. The company made promises that seemed rock solid. Defined benefit pensions that guaranteed specific monthly payments for life. If you worked 30 years in the steel mills, you'd retire with dignity. That was the promise. Here's what actually happened. Throughout the 1,980 seconds, British Steel was competing with cheaper imports from Japan and South Korea. Profit margins shrank, and when profits shrink, the first thing companies do is reduce pension contributions. They told themselves it was temporary, just until business improved. But here's the trick they used. UK accounting rules at the time allowed companies to smooth returns over multiple years. If the stock market had a good year, they could count those gains for the next 5 years. This let them justify lower contributions. The pension looked healthy on paper, while actual cash contributions dropped by 40%. By 1985, the pension fund was receiving half the money it needed. But nobody told the workers. The annual reports showed everything was fine. In 1988, British Steel was privatized. The government sold it to private investors. And this is where things get dark. Because when the government sells a company, they want the highest price possible. And a company with massive unfunded pension liabilities doesn't sell for much. So they used creative accounting. They valued the pension assets at peak market prices. They assumed future investment returns of 9% per year, double what bonds were paying. They pushed out the timeline for when benefits would need to be paid. On paper, the pension was 95% funded. In reality, it was closer to 60%, but the real numbers were buried in footnotes that nobody read. Through the 1,990 seconds, the new private owners of British Steel made a calculation. They could see the pension was underfunded. They knew the math didn't work, but they also knew that admitting the problem would tank the stock price. So they did what every failing pension does. They made bigger promises. They enhanced benefits for current workers. They offered early retirement packages with full pensions at age 55. They increased cost of living adjustments. Why? Because those promises wouldn't come due for 10 or 15 years. By then, different executives would be in charge. It was financial, kicking the can down the road, except the can was filled with explosives. Remember those 9% return assumptions? From 2000 to 2003, the UK stock market dropped 45%. The pension fund, heavily invested in equities, got hammered. What was supposed to grow by 9% per year was now down 15% per year. Suddenly the math became impossible to hide. A fund that needed £20 billion to pay all benefits only had £12 billion. The gap was widening by hundreds of millions per month. And here's the final nail. In 1980, British Steel had 5 active workers for every retiree. By 2005, that ratio had flipped. Now, there were 2 retirees for every active worker. The company was closing mills and laying off workers. Fewer workers meant fewer contributions. More retirees meant more payouts. The math was fatal. By 2005, the British Steel Pension Fund was £3.5 billion in the hole. The company couldn't cover it. They merged with a Dutch company, declared the pension scheme closed, and dumped it on the government's pension protection fund. 250,000 British steel workers and retirees got a haircut. The government fund paid out 90% of promised benefits, but only up to a cap. If you were promised £30,000 per year, you got £18,000. If you were 55 and planned to retire, you had to work another 10 years. If you'd already retired, your cost of living increases stopped. People who had worked 40 years in the mills watched their retirement security evaporate. Not because of a war, not because of a natural disaster, because of math that was ignored for 25 years. Now, let's jump across the Atlantic. Detroit, Michigan, 1,950 to 2013. In 1950, Detroit was the richest city in America per capita. Over 1.8 million people, the heart of American manufacturing, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, union jobs with strong pensions. City workers, police, firefighters, sanitation workers had some of the best defined benefit pensions in the country. The promise was simple. Work 25 years for the city, retire at 55 with 75% of your final salary for life, plus health care. Detroit made this promise to 30,000 workers and retirees. And just like British Steel before them, Detroit followed the same 5 stages to collapse. Starting in the 1,960 seconds, Detroit began bleeding population. People moved to the suburbs, the tax base shrank, but the pension promises didn't shrink with it. From 1,965 to 1,980, Detroit's population dropped from 1.8 million to 1.2 million. Tax revenue fell 30%. The city had 2 choices: cut services or underfund the pension. They chose the pension. Year after year, Detroit contributed 40% to 60% of what actuaries said was needed. They told themselves they'd make it up later. They never did. By 1990, the pension fund was seriously underwater. But Detroit did what governments do. They changed the assumptions. They assumed 8% annual investment returns. When those didn't materialize, they assumed 8.5%, then 9%. The higher the assumed return, the lower the required contribution. They also used something called smoothing. If the fund lost money one year, they'd spread that loss over 15 years. This made the current year look better while making the future impossible. By 2000, Detroit's pension was reporting 90% funded. Independent analysts said it was closer to 50%. Here's where it gets insane. In 1996 and 1999, while the pension was already underfunded, Detroit's politicians enhanced the benefits. They added cost of living adjustments. They lowered the retirement age from 60 to 55. They increased the payout formula from 2.5% per year of service to 2.8%. Why? Politics. The police union endorsed the mayor. The firefighters union donated to city council campaigns. Politicians bought votes with promises that wouldn't come due until they were out of office. And here's the kicker. In 2003, Detroit issued pension obligation bonds, borrowed $1.4 billion to put into the pension fund. They borrowed money to cover the hole in a retirement system that was already drowning in promises it couldn't keep. From 2000 to 2012, Detroit's pension fund assumed it would earn 8% per year. It actually earned 3.4%. Every year of missing returns dug the hole deeper. By 2013, the fund needed $6.4 billion to cover promised benefits. It had $3.8 billion. The shortfall was $2.6 billion more than Detroit's entire annual budget. In 1970, Detroit had 18,000 active city workers. By 2013, it had 11,000. But the number of retirees had grown from 12,000 to 21,000. Detroit was paying benefits to 2 retirees for every active worker. The math was impossible. On the 18th of July 2013, Detroit filed for bankruptcy, the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. In bankruptcy court, pensions got cut. Police and fire retirees took a 4.5% reduction in benefits. General city workers took a 4.5% cut, plus their cost of living increases were eliminated. Health care benefits were slashed. A 75-year-old former sanitation worker named John Williams told reporters he'd worked for Detroit for 32 years. He'd been promised $38,000 per year in pension and full health care. After bankruptcy, he got $34,200 and had to pay for his own health insurance at $700 per month. His effective retirement income had been cut by 30%. People who'd done everything right, worked hard, didn't retire early, didn't live extravagantly, lost 30% of their retirement because politicians and pension managers had lied about the math for 40 years. Let me show you one more. The one that proves this pattern isn't limited to cities or countries. This is about private sector unions. In 1955, the Teamsters Union created the Central States Pension Fund. This fund covered truck drivers across 37 states. At its peak in 1970, it had 500,000 active members and $2 billion in assets. It was the crown jewel of union benefits. Truck drivers worked brutal hours, but they had one thing to look forward to: a guaranteed pension. Work 25 years, retire at 57, get $4,000 per month for life. That was the deal. Same 5 stages, same inevitable collapse. Through the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, trucking deregulation hit the industry hard. Companies went bankrupt. The strong union contracts that guaranteed pension contributions started disappearing. By 2000, the fund was receiving $500 million per year, less in contributions than it had in 1980. But the promises kept growing. The fund wasn't getting the money it needed, but it kept promising full benefits to everyone. In the early 2000s, the Central States Fund started using creative accounting. They counted withdrawn employers, companies that had left the fund, as still contributing. They assumed 7.5% annual returns, even though the fund had averaged 3% for the previous decade. They smoothed losses over 15 years. In 2008, the fund told members it was 70% funded. An independent audit later revealed it was actually 48% funded. The difference? $10 billion in hidden losses. In the 1,990 seconds, even as the fund weakened, the Teamsters negotiated richer benefits. They increased the pension multiplier, they added 13th check bonuses, they enhanced disability benefits. Every contract negotiation, the union demanded more pension promises. The companies agreed because the problems wouldn't show up for 15 years. From 2000 to 2015, the Central States Fund assumed 7.5% returns. It earned 2.1%. The 2008 financial crisis alone cost the fund $4 billion. By 2015, it needed $36 billion to pay all promised benefits. It had $18 billion. The hole was deepening by $2 billion per year. In 1980, Central States had 4 active workers per retiree. By 2015, it had 1 active worker for every 3 retirees. The fund was paying out $3.46 for every $1 in contributions. The math was death spiral territory. In 2016, the fund applied for permission to cut benefits under a new federal law. They proposed cutting benefits by 50% to 70% for many retirees. The Treasury Department rejected the cuts not because they were unnecessary, but because even 70% cuts wouldn't save the fund. It was too far gone. As of 2024, Central States is projected to run completely out of money by 2025. When it does, 350,000 retirees will see their pensions cut to the government insurance minimums about $1,300 per month maximum. A truck driver named Bill in Ohio worked for 38 years. He was promised $3,800 per month. When the fund goes insolvent, he'll get $1,280. His retirement income will drop by 66%. He's 72 years old. There's no do-over. 3 times, 3 different pension systems, 3 different countries and contexts, but the exact same 5-stage collapse, the exact same lies, the exact same math. Before we look at what's happening in America right now, you need to understand why this pattern keeps repeating. This isn't bad luck. This is mathematics and incentive structures. Let me show you how the mechanism actually works. Pension systems fail because of something called temporal misalignment. The people making the promises won't be around when the bills come due. A politician elected in 2000 can promise generous pension benefits that won't be paid until 2030. By then, they're retired on their own pension. The crisis is someone else's problem. The same is true for corporate executives. A CEO can enhance pension benefits to keep workers happy and avoid strikes. The cost hits the balance sheet 15 years later, after they've moved to another company or retired with their golden parachute. Everyone involved has an incentive to kick the can down the road. Unions want bigger promises. Politicians want votes. Executives want labor peace. Nobody wants to admit the math doesn't work. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense. It's structural. The system is designed to fail because the costs are delayed and the benefits are immediate. Here's why small underfunding becomes catastrophic. Pension math works on compound interest. If you promise to pay someone $50,000 per year starting in 30 years, you need to invest money now and let it grow. If you assume 7% annual returns, you need to contribute $6,800 today to fund that $50,000 annual payment. But if you only contribute $5,000, just 26% less the shortfall compounds, that missing $1,800 would have grown to $13,700 over 30 years. Multiply that across millions of workers and you get trillion-dollar holes. And it gets worse. Most pension shortfalls happen during the first 10 to 15 years, when compounding has the most impact. By the time anyone admits there's a problem, the math has become impossible to fix. Here's a real example. In 2002, Illinois owed its pension system $1.2 billion in contributions. They only paid $600 million. That $600 million shortfall, at 7% compounded growth, should have turned into $3.3 billion by 2024. But they didn't make up that payment. They kept underfunding year after year. By 2024, Illinois' total pension debt had ballooned to over $140 billion. The compounding works both ways. Miss contributions early, and the hole gets exponentially bigger. This is why pension crises seem to appear suddenly. The underfunding happens gradually and quietly for years. Then one day, someone does honest accounting and discovers the gap is too large to ever close. The crisis was always there, it just took decades to become visible. This is the big lie. Every pension makes an assumption about future investment returns. Assume 8% returns, and you need to contribute less money now. Assume 5% returns, and you need to contribute much more. So, what do pension funds do? They assume high returns. For the last 20 years, most public pensions have assumed 7% to 8% annual returns. But from 2000 to 2020, the average public pension earned 5.3%. That 2% difference compounded over 20 years creates catastrophic shortfalls. And here's the kicker. When returns fall short, pension funds don't lower their assumptions. They increase risk. They move money from bonds into stocks, from stocks into private equity, from private equity into hedge funds. Each step up the risk ladder chases higher returns but increases the chance of catastrophic losses. In 2008, many pension funds had 60% to 70% in stocks and lost 30% in a single year. That loss took years to recover, and during those years, they still had to pay benefits. Pensions are fundamentally a demographic game. You need lots of young workers contributing and relatively few retirees collecting. When that ratio flips, the math breaks. In 1960, the ratio for most pensions was 5 to 1 or higher, 5 workers per retiree. Now it's often 2 to 1 or worse. Some pensions have more retirees than active workers. When that happens, contributions can't possibly cover benefit payments. The fund bleeds cash every month. This is what happened to Detroit. It's what happened to Central States, and it's happening to hundreds of pension funds right now across America. Here's what makes this pattern so devastating. Pension collapse doesn't happen gradually. It accelerates. In the beginning, small underfunding doesn't seem like a crisis. The fund still has billions in assets. Benefits get paid on time. Everything seems fine. But beneath the surface, a feedback loop is starting. Underfunding means lower returns. Lower returns mean bigger shortfalls. Bigger shortfalls mean they need even higher returns. Higher return targets mean more risk. More risk means bigger potential losses. And then demographics shift. More retirees, fewer workers. The fund starts paying out more than it takes in. Now they're not just dealing with investment shortfalls, they're bleeding cash. At some point, they cross a threshold. The math becomes impossible. Even perfect investment returns can't save it. The only options are massive contribution increases or benefit cuts, and if contributions can't increase because the employer is broke, cuts are inevitable. This is the acceleration phase, and once you enter it, there's no way out. Detroit entered it around 2005, Central States around 2008, and they're just the beginning. People want to blame corruption or bad actors, and sure, there's been corruption. The Teamsters pension had mob influence in the 1,970 seconds. Some politicians have been outright criminals. But that's not why the pattern repeats. The pattern repeats because the math is unforgiving. If you underfund by 20% for 15 years while promising enhanced benefits and then earn 3% instead of 7% on investments while your worker to retiree ratio collapses, you go bankrupt. Every time. Regardless of intentions. The incentive structure guarantees underfunding. The compound mathematics guarantee the problem gets worse. The demographic trends guarantee the ratio collapses. And the return assumptions guarantee disappointment. It's a machine designed to fail, and every pension system that follows this pattern will fail. The only variables are timing and scale. Now let me show you why the United States is in the acceleration phase right now. And here's what should terrify you. The United States isn't heading toward a pension crisis. We're in the middle of one, stage by stage, the same pattern. Let me show you exactly where we are. According to the American Legislative Exchange Council, state and local government pensions in the U.S. are underfunded by $6.8 trillion. That's using realistic assumptions. The official government number is $1.4 trillion. The difference? They assume 7% returns. Independent analysts use 4% to 5% market-based rates. Add in corporate pensions, another $1.7 trillion shortfall. Add in multi-employer union pensions like Central States, another $750 billion. Total, over $9 trillion underfunded right now. And that was before 2022, when the stock market dropped 20% and wiped out another trillion in pension assets. How did we get here? Simple. For the last 20 years, states and cities contributed 70% to 85% of what actuaries said was needed, year after year. California alone has underpaid its pensions by $300 billion over the last 2 decades. Illinois by $200 billion. Just like British Steel, just like Detroit. Except this time it's happening in 45 states simultaneously. Check. Want to know how bad the accounting tricks are? In 2014, Moody's credit rating agency recalculated state pension liabilities using honest assumptions. They found actual pension debt was 3 times higher than reported. Connecticut officially reported 52% funded. Moody's said 29%. New Jersey reported 54% funded. Reality, 31%. Kentucky reported 37% funded. Reality, 18%. And it's not just state pensions. Corporate pensions use similar games. They discount future liabilities at expected return rates instead of risk-free rates. This makes underfunding look smaller than it really is. The biggest trick? Smoothing. When pension funds lose money in a market crash, they spread those losses over 5 to 15 years. So the 2008 crash, some pensions are still pretending it didn't fully happen. They've smoothed the 35% loss into 2.5% losses per year for 15 years. On paper, everything looks manageable. In reality, the money is gone. Check. Even as pension funds weakened, politicians kept enhancing benefits. In California, from 1999 to 2008, the state passed SB 400 increasing pension benefits by 50% for many workers. They retroactively granted extra benefits for years already worked. How did they justify this? They assumed the stock market would keep going up 8.5% per year forever. When a Stanford professor warned it was fiscally reckless, politicians ignored him. This happened across the country. Chicago enhanced police and fire pensions, New York enhanced teacher pensions, New Jersey enhanced benefits for all state workers, all during the 2000s, all while the pensions were already underfunded. It's the exact same playbook. Make promises today, let someone else deal with the consequences in 15 years. Check. From 2000 to 2020, public pensions assumed they'd earn 7.5% to 8% per year. They earned 5.9%. That difference, 1.6% per year compounded over 20 years, is catastrophic. Let's make this concrete. CalPERS, California's public pension, has $440 billion in assets. If they earn 7% instead of the assumed 7.5%, they'll be short $100 billion over the next 20 years, and they're currently earning 6.1%. And it gets worse. To chase those return targets, pension funds have moved into riskier assets. In 1990, public pensions had 60% in stocks. Today it's 70% to 75%. They've added private equity, hedge funds, real estate, all searching for returns. But here's the problem. Private equity and hedge funds charge 2% management fees plus 20% performance fees. After fees, many of these investments barely beat bonds, but they tie up pension money for years and can't be sold in a crisis. When the next market crash comes, and it will, these illiquid investments will hammer pension funds. Just like 2008, check. This is where it gets fatal. In 2000, most state pensions had 3 to 4 active workers per retiree. Today it's closer to 1.5 to 1. By 2030, it will be 1 to 1 or worse. Illinois has 220,000 active workers and 267,000 retirees. More people collecting than contributing. Florida has 400,000 actives and 385,000 retirees, almost equal. And this isn't fixable. Baby boomers are retiring at 10,000 per day. Government employment has been flat for 20 years. There's no wave of young workers coming to replace retirees. When you have equal or fewer workers than retirees, the math is impossible. Contributions can never cover benefit payments. The fund bleeds cash every single month. And as it shrinks, even good investment returns can't save it. We're in the acceleration phase. Check. Here's what most people don't realize. This isn't a future crisis. It's happening right now. In 2024, over 130 multi-employer pension plans covering 1.4 million workers are projected to become insolvent within 10 years. Not struggling, not underfunded, completely insolvent, running out of money. The Bakery and Confectionery Union pension, insolvent by 2026. The United Mine Workers pension would have been insolvent in 2022 without a federal bailout. The Iron Workers pension in several districts, critical status. The list goes on. And it's not just union pensions. Several cities are on the edge. Dallas police and fire pension came within months of collapse in 2017. They had to make emergency benefit cuts to survive. Phoenix, Houston, and Jacksonville all have pensions below 60% funded. One bad market downturn, and they're in crisis territory. Over the next 10 years, multiple major pension systems will become insolvent. Not might, will. Here's the timeline that actuaries are projecting. 2025. Central States Teamsters runs out of money. 350,000 retirees see cuts to government minimums. 2026 to 2028. Multiple multi-employer pension plans, trucking, mining, retail approach insolvency. About 1.3 million workers and retirees affected. 2028 to 2030. State pension crises accelerate. Illinois, Kentucky, New Jersey face insolvency without massive tax increases or benefit cuts. 2030 to 2035, the big public pensions start showing severe stress. CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York teachers. These are trillion-dollar funds. If they start failing, it cascades. And here's what nobody wants to say out loud. The federal government's Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the insurance fund that's supposed to backstop failed pensions, is itself running out of money. The multi-employer program is projected to be insolvent by 2026. So when these pensions fail, there's no safety net. The government can't bail them all out. The numbers are too big. We're talking about $12 trillion in unfunded promises. That's more than half of U.S. GDP. 50 million Americans have defined benefit pensions. Teachers, police officers, firefighters, postal workers, auto workers, truck drivers, steel workers, coal miners, people who were promised specific retirement benefits in exchange for decades of work. Many of these workers don't have Social Security. If you work for a state or city, you often don't pay into Social Security. Your pension is your entire retirement. When that pension gets cut by 30% or 50% or 70%, you're not adjusting your lifestyle. You're making choices between medication and food. And this isn't distant future. This is happening now. In 2024, over 100 pension plans are in critical status, meaning they'll run out of money within 10 to 15 years without intervention. Another 200 are in endangered status. The pattern is complete. All 5 stages. The collapse is underway. The only question is how fast and how severe. 3 pension systems collapsed using this exact pattern. British Steel, Detroit, Central States Teamsters. Each one thought they were different. Each one believed the math would somehow work out. Each one promised workers they'd be taken care of. They were wrong every single time. And now the United States is running the same playbook. We've underfunded by trillions. We've hidden the numbers with accounting tricks. We've made bigger promises even as the math deteriorated. We've assumed investment returns that never materialized, and the demographics have shifted into death spiral territory. We're telling ourselves we're different. We have the world's largest economy. We have sophisticated financial markets. We have the Federal Reserve. We'll figure it out. But the pattern doesn't care about sophistication. The pattern is mathematical. You cannot promise $12 trillion more than you have and expect it to work out. You cannot underfund for 20 years and assume compounding will fix itself. You cannot ignore demographics and hope for the best. The math is unforgiving. And we've already crossed the threshold into the acceleration phase. Over the next decade, tens of millions of Americans will discover their retirement was a lie. Teachers who worked 30 years will see their pensions cut by 40%. Police officers who risked their lives will retire on half what they were promised. Truck drivers who destroyed their bodies will get $1,200 per month instead of $3,500. And when they ask how this happened, the answer will be simple. The incentives guaranteed underfunding. The math guaranteed failure. And the people who made the promises made sure they wouldn't be around when the bills came due. This isn't speculation. This is pattern recognition. We've seen this happen 3 times already. The variables were different countries, different industries, different political systems, but the mechanism was identical. And now it's America's turn. Here's what makes this different from the previous collapses. The UK steel pension affected 250,000 people. Detroit hit 30,000. Central states will impact 350,000. Those are massive individual tragedies. But the American pension crisis affects 50 million people. That's 1 in 6 American workers or retirees. When 50 million people suddenly have 30% to 70% less retirement income than expected, that's not just a pension crisis. That's an economic crisis. That's reduced consumer spending. That's families moving in together. That's elderly poverty on a scale we haven't seen since before Social Security was created. The ripple effects will touch everyone. Property values in retirement communities will crater. States will face massive budget shortfalls requiring tax increases. Municipal services will be cut as money flows to pension obligations instead of roads, schools, and police. If you have a defined benefit pension, understand that the promises made to you may not be kept, not because of malice, but because of mathematics. Run the numbers yourself. Find out your pension's funded ratio using realistic return assumptions, not the inflated ones they publish. If it's below 70%, you're in danger. If you're counting on a pension for retirement, have a backup plan. Build savings outside the pension system. Assume you'll get 70% of what you were promised, not 100%. Hope for the best, but prepare for the pattern. If you're young and being offered a pension, understand what you're being offered. It's not a guarantee. It's a promise from people who won't be around to keep it. The math that destroyed pensions in the past is still operating today. And if you're a taxpayer, understand that you'll be asked to pay for this. When state pensions fail, they'll come for your taxes. When city pensions fail, they'll cut services. The cost of these broken promises will be spread across everyone. 3 times before, pension systems followed this 5-stage pattern to collapse. 3 times, the people in charge said it was different. 3 times, millions of retirees discovered their security was an illusion. The United States is not different. The math is not different. The incentives are not different. We're following the pattern. Stage 5, acceleration phase, and the consequences are coming. Maybe we'll find a way to stop it. Maybe politicians will make the hard choices. Maybe pension funds will suddenly earn 10% per year. Maybe demographics will reverse. But the pattern says otherwise. History says otherwise. And the math, which doesn't care about hope or intention, says we're heading for the same destination as everyone before us. If understanding this pattern matters to you, if you want to know what happens next and how to protect yourself, subscribe to this channel. Because when these pension systems start failing in the next few years, you'll want to understand why it happened and what comes next. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past, and I'll show you where to look.